Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see you all. And we've just been getting to know one another and make sure that we've got some steady connections. And we're delighted this week to be welcoming Dr. Hilary Robertson Hickling. Now, Hilary, you joined us a couple of weeks ago with some problems with the connectivity, but it was a fascinating session. And you were telling us about some of the work that you and your husband had done, and this is one of your husband's books. It's on psychohistoriography. Sadly, Professor Fred Hickling passed the end of last year, so our condolences to you. But Hilary, it's great to see that you're carrying on with the work. So Hilary, I think over to you. We had some discussion about what you were going to cover, but I'm going to let you take the lead.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity. We are, of course, in the middle of, I think the US is Black History Month, and in the UK, you had your Black History Month in October. We are, of course, grappling with so many things in so many places that perhaps it's a good time for us to be able to greet and talk through some of these issues with each other and to determine where next we want to go. I think the first thing that we wanted to talk about was the disappointment of the Caribbean people in Britain. Much has been written from as far back as the 1950s, and of course up to the present moment. We now have the long, what is it? We now have the long song being shown on television here, which was written by a Jamaican, the daughter of Jamaican parents who went to England. And of course, it retraces some of the experiences and some of the issues which are unfurling or developing today. So briefly, let me say, imagine this scenario. Many years ago, I visited Britain and met one of my teachers who was actually a white Irishman born in Liverpool, one of his friends. And so he said, "What is your name?" And I said, "Hilary Robertson." And he said, "What?" So then I looked at him and said, "Didn't you know we had your names?" And he didn't know that. So one of the big things that the people who, of course, came to the Americas and, of course, to Britain was that they had been part of a colonization process for hundreds of years. So my father studied in England in the 1950s. So his name was Judson Robertson. So he went to London Telecom because he was studying telecommunication. And the man interviewing him said, "But you can't be Judson Robertson." And my father said, "Yes, I am." So one of the issues then is that the Caribbean people who went to Britain thought that they belonged to this place. But the majority of people in Britain thought that they belonged somewhere else. So that absence of belonging, of which much has been written, the existential crisis, which comes out of that, the whole business of being unwanted, the welcome, of course, being no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. That I think has set a continued platform for some of the thinking. Imagine that someone would have gone to Barbados and recruited people to come to work in the underground in Britain and in the hospitals to help to rebuild after the war, only to find that the person was unwanted. So I think one of the things that struck me was that how is it that so few people in Britain knew about the colonial world? Actually, yesterday I read that, was it the president of Ireland? I may have got it wrong. Was saying that there's a kind of amnesia in the academy and in the press about the imperial intention. and what in fact happened. So I think that part of the work of the folks here is about providing information about what really happened, because it really did happen. Something that I find quite amazing. And this is something, a personal thing. How could people literally have been in bed together for 400 years and then not understood how they came into being? It's mind-boggling. But I guess, as a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist said, maybe the British, and of course, maybe in the colonies, we weren't very psychologically minded. So we weren't thinking that our behavior would result in the kinds of things that have happened. How is it you don't know me and I'm your cousin? So there's another funny story. Apparently there was a clan in Scotland where and the person in charge of the clan died. And an erstwhile Jamaican, a black one, decided he would be going up to become the new head of the clan. What do you think happened? They did not welcome him at all. So what we are now having is this whole problem of saying, why don't these people go back to where they come from? Well, they come from you. So they're coming home to stay with you. And of course, that creates a problem. So that's one of the issues I think that we said we wanted to look at. And then the second issue, if I remember correctly, Liz, please remind me, was that we wanted to understand how do we create the kind of spaces and places and language which allows us to look at the whole business about the repair, the reparation, which is not only about something economic, but it's about something psychological. It is about something, for example, the Jews in the last week have been looking at the issue of the Holocaust and so on, which is in much more recent memory. However, we have recognized through the work of the geneticists that there's something called epigenetics, which means that we're passing down trauma one generation after another. How can we stop that? This is now in the 21st century. What have we learned? How are we going to build the bridges? So I think that if we look at those two things, the absence of welcome and the lack of belonging, and we look at how to repair this. First of all, we're going to have to acknowledge that it is an issue. And perhaps the last point in terms of explaining about who I am and why I think so. I attended a school which was established the year of the beginning of the reign of Queen Elizabeth, who is currently on the throne. So my school is called the Queen's School here in Kingston. It's called the Queen's School. And the Queen's School has 4 houses. They are Victoria, Elizabeth, Alexandria, and Mary. No, I happened to be sitting on that school board and we had various challenges, you know, with the modern girls. And I said to a colleague who had studied law in Britain, I said, how do you think that these girls relate to Victoria and Elizabeth and Mary? The answer is they don't, because they come from a vastly different world. So I want us to really think about some of those issues as we are trying to advance our thinking this morning. Liz, should I just ask you to make some comments there for me?
All right then, well, I'm going to come in there. Now, the third thing that I hope that we may have time to discuss today, but if not today, certainly again. Fred's, the book that I know Fred wrote after psychohistoriography was called Owning Our Madness.
Yes.
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 Now, I misunderstood that title, I realized when I had an opportunity to find out about the book. I thought it was about white people owning our madness, being in a mindset that thought that we could just go into other people's countries and take over other people's countries, and that's acceptable, and to treat people in the ways they did. So maybe we can look at that. In actual fact, the book is Fred writes about the work he was doing in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, and working with people to understand their history. So the Black community there. So that's I think is interesting. But in the book and the papers that we've sent round to everybody, there is also the chart that shows what white Europeans thought they were doing between the 1500s on, and what the black rest of the world thought that was going on from the same time until the current time. So that's another point to discuss.
Okay, I'll just speak about it very briefly. The idea of owning one's own madness is about people wherever they are facing who they are. Because it's fair to say that many people have their own, the well people have their madness and the ill people have their madness. And in fact, sometimes the ill are well and the well are, because, you know, human life. And so the idea was that instead of pretending that we don't have these challenges, we should own our madness. Now, briefly, some of this that Fred was writing about had to do with his own personal experience.
Right.
Part of Fred's family came from the Hickling Broads in Britain. So yes, that's where his family comes from. That's where the name comes from. And in fact, the family visited it at a certain time. His father was a colonial civil servant who was a nearly white-looking man who had African blood. His mother was she also had African and European blood. So within himself, he understood these contradictions very, very clearly. Hickling Broad, so you know, you can see it on a map. And part of the challenge that we have is that people are who they are. And we need to realize that these contradictions, so even the idea of, let us use Columbus or whomever, Henry Morgan, that the person is on, there's a contradictory process because you can't discover somebody who was already there. That's ridiculous. That's lunacy, actually. And so this idea of the notions of conquest and the notions of the civilizing mission. The civilizing mission is essentially a name given to a group of people who want to conquer another place and another people. And the people who are conquered then have to decide how they're going to fit it out. So here we're looking at, let's use a current example. Who is dying in the pandemic? A lot of the Black people, the nurses, the doctors, the people, the old people, the poor people in Britain. And you remember, so some of the people who are, of course, dying are the people who are at the bottom of the society. And so how could this be happening? Why is it happening that the places where the vaccine is available, that's one set of people and another set are not getting it? It's the same thing that's saying, we should get it first because we are rich and we must get it. But you will get it last because you are not worthwhile. How can the world continue along this kind of line? So this madness, it hasn't finished. It hasn't been cured. It's still there. But the madness is both within me and it's within you. So we then have to find a space to acknowledge that and to work out how we are going to become sane. I think that is the mission that we are looking at. How do we become sane? And how do we manage to hold this little world that we all share together? Yes.
Well, thank you. That I think that's, you know, we've got that now, and stick a pin on that one. So we've got the three things that were introduced today. The disappointment of the Caribbean people who came to Britain. And I think there's all sorts of ways we can think through that, and people will want to respond to that, particularly if you've got Caribbean heritage. Then you may want to comment on that when we open up the discussion. Then about creating places, spaces where we can discuss how to move forward, reparation in whatever form, and how to understand better, but how to build bridges. So I think, Natalie, would you like to come in on the first point about the disappointment of Caribbean people who came over here? Your family weren't Windrush people, I know, in that context.
Yeah, my family weren't Windrush people, but I came, I was a group of Jamaican teachers who were recruited in Jamaica to come to work here in the UK, and found it.
Whoops, we're losing you, Natalie. Okay, so while we're trying to catch back up with Natalie, Jim, perhaps I'd like to ask you then to respond, because you've been in the UK a while, haven't you?
From a child. Yes, I'm 77, nearly 78, and I've been in England since 1961. I want to comment on what my sister Hilary has said about people are who they are. I want to take a different view of that. People are, I believe, in terms of what they've been socialized into and the structure that exists within that socialization. So slavery and slaves, including their slave masters, they all had different role that was decided for them by a higher being. I'm not saying God, I'm not saying it's a spiritual being, but that was used partly to indoctrinate and socialize people of different color into certain categories that fits in within a legal, structural, institutional framework, which they felt was probably had some divine power that placed them as an inferior group of people due to their history being misinformed, their culture devalued, and institution that mold their thinking. So I'm not disappointed. I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed to an extent that where in the Caribbean we fought. My parents were illiterate peasants, mixture of indentured laborers, indigenous people, African people, and people from different religious faiths. They challenged the system. That's where I got my politics from. My mother and father risked their lives to oppose the white plantation owners and the overseers, and also those black people or mixed race people who had more loyalty to the white race than the black race. And as a child, I saw the suffering. I was part of the struggle. I got involved in it. And when I came to Britain, I was disappointed that it appeared that the only organization, institution was there for black people, half-heartedly, was the trades union and things like the Communist Party, not the churches. I went to church and I was terribly unwelcome. In the area where I sat, I was the only black person and people stood up. Yeah, people stood up at the back of the church rather than coming and sitting next to me. So
I have to go out.
although I'm disappointed, I'm not surprised. And to this day, 60 years later, I find the same thing in my capacity as a community activist, as a university lecturer, as an anti-racist. We had spasms and small groups of people taking on the system and fought it, despite the institution through the police and the courts came down on them, gave them long sentences for trivia. Many in the 60s, 70s had drugs planted on them. I recall in my town in Luton, if a black person was driving a car, the police would stop them saying, how come us white people born in this country can't own a home and have a car, and you're driving a car? You're doing all these things. You're coming, you're taking our jobs, taking our homes, taking of our people. My marriage has been 58 years to a white person, and I've been challenged. What dare you having a white girlfriend or a white partner? And you know, I agree with my sister Hilary that we got to really take more responsibility. What we found and the life we enjoyed in England and in America. I mean, America had the longest spell of hundreds of years, although black people.
Excuse me, I'm going to have to keep going in and oh, come this way.
Yeah, black people have been in Britain for over 2,000 years. And yet much of us see ourselves as newcomers, inferior, that we come here as your guest, although we've been told it's our mother country, and we've treated so badly. But to this day, my biggest disappointment, if somebody asked me about my activities in race relation, is that not more black mixed race people coming together. And I'm thinking of black and Asian and all the other people with different shades. I've been told about black and brown people. I don't know where this is all shifting. So black people are now supposed to be Africans. Brown people are supposed to be Chinese. And people like myself have no home because I'm Asian, but not a practicing Muslim or Hindu, and come from the Caribbean. So my blackness is very difficult to define. My suffering is difficult to define. And who's responsible? Is it the white trade unionists that call me names, marginalize me? Is it the white people in the Labour Party I spent 59 years in, treat me as a foreigner, not as equal as them, but useful to be part of the barricade in attacking capitalism? Why aren't my people so involved in businesses? Let's set up business. Let's prove ourselves as supporters of capitalism and friendly with the system that exploits us, rather than standing up against that very system. Isolation, not belonging, being marginalized, being carrots dangled in our face. If you're good British, you're a good person, we like you. You would even give you an MB or an OB and make you into prince and princesses and lords and sirs and knighthoods. And there are many of those around Britain now, all over the place. But if you challenge the system, you're Jim the Cordon, you're an evil man, you have a chip on your shoulder, you lack in character, support for the Queen and the monarchy, and despite the past. So we got to take responsibility, but too many of us, black, Asian, brown, whatever, we expect others to do it for us. I heard a black woman on the radio this morning saying, why should I fight racism? It's not my problem. It's white people's problem. They should be fighting. And I thought, by God, if we don't fight on our own behalf, we must link up with white people and institutions, but we can't take ourselves out of that struggle and expect others to do it. If they do it, they'll do it with their agenda, not ours. I hope that's some contribution.
Thank you so much. As you can see, Hilary's having some problems. Hilary, we quite understand. You just do as best you can. We're just so delighted that you're able to be with us.
Yeah.
Jim, thank you so much. That was so powerful, and to explain, to others some of the challenges that you faced and your perspective. I was just going to ask Juanita, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I sort of, one of the things I've been kind of reflecting on is I'm trying to think about really what's the function of racism. I think what I worry about is that it's used, it kind of obscures the operation of class. This thing that actually it's the exploitation of the poor. And I think, and I'm just thinking about that because I was brought up in Nigeria, and you have the black elite in Nigeria who are very wealthy and doing what they're doing and having business links with other of the white elite, and they're doing fine. But in both areas, what you're looking at is the exploitation of the poor white and the poor black community. And I just feel somehow that the reason for me why racism really needs to be tackled head on is because that's what it does. It really obscures what's really going on. It's the same thing, when you look at COVID, and we're sort of looking all the time at issues of race, but really it's a problem about poor people, poor people within the Black community, poor people within the white community. And it has a bigger impact on the Black community because a lot of the Black community falls into the working class. I mean, we do have a Black middle class, but it's relatively small. So, but what spoke to me very strongly in terms of what Hilary mentioned was this absence of welcome. Because of course, being brought up in Nigeria, it doesn't matter where you're brought up, whether you're brought up in the Caribbean or West Africa, the education system didn't teach me anything about Nigeria. It taught me everything about Britain. And I spent my entire childhood waiting, almost like I was just in a holding bay in Nigeria, waiting to be birthed in England, and this sort of, so I came to school here. And what the thing that I find particularly weird is that there isn't an understanding that it's not just about the historical relationship. There's also a biological relationship. I mean, I am here as a Black person because my father was a colonial who went out to West Africa and met my mother and then brought us back here, and that's the kind of thing, I'm working at the moment with Malik Al-Nazir, who's doing, he's also writing the journey of his story, in that he had a Black father and a white Welsh mother, and he ended up in a children's home. And then, of course, when he did research, he found out he was related to Andrew Watson, who was part of the elite as a mixed race person here in the late 1800s. But then he was part of the poor in Liverpool. And he's done this research going back to Guyana and traces his family on both sides to the Black people that had worked on the plantations of his white relatives, and he's related to both. And it's just, that's the thing I find absolutely dumbfounding, how we've got now with the Windrush generation having issues with their citizenship status. It's just preposterous. The idea that you educate people to be as British as possible. They learn to be more British than the British, and then, so I don't know, I find it such a complex issue, but I think the thing I worry about the most is really the fact that racism, I spend all day dealing with issues of race and racism, but at root of it all, it's an issue of class and how the elite, wherever they are, continue to exploit the poor.
Hilary, over to you. Back to you, Hilary.
Okay. I know that I read recently somewhere, once again, a discussion that said that the elites in Britain, this is now in relation to Brexit, which is one of the latest topics. It's more than a topic, it's your lives. That the elite is always able to put things out which can be quite destructive, and then to say, it wasn't me. There's a Jamaican music singer called Shaggy, and he sings, it wasn't me. That they're able to create this narrative about, and I see from time to time, I'm now reading, who is responsible for the fiasco of Brexit? Can you name the people? And I'm not asking anybody to name them, but the way in which they are disengaging and pretending that it wasn't them who promoted this idea. And I agree with you. I think sometimes it's class and sometimes it's race, but sometimes the two things are coterminous. And that is where the contradiction lies. So, for example, I am aware, and I have seen work written about the fact that we have colonies of, what were they called? Colonies which were there for exploitation and ones which were there for families to live. So Australia has some of those colonies which were built where the British went to live. Some of the colonies were there where they went to dump the people who had been involved in creating problems or had whatever the reason. So you had colonies of settlement and colonies of exploitation. So we often use Barbados as a colony of settlement where you established much more social infrastructure much earlier, education, and so on. Whereas Jamaica was a colony of plunder. So that essentially by the time the British had formally left, the country was impoverished because the wealth had been taken away. And to everybody's amazement, we are recognizing that the 20 million pounds that was repaid to the planters, it was repaid, apparently since the 21st century, the loan was paid off in England. The Africans who had been enslaved in Jamaica received nothing, but the planters received compensation. And I think UCL has done a big job in terms of identifying who are the beneficiaries, because the beneficiaries, including the erstwhile Mr. Cameron, who was your former prime minister, who came to Jamaica and says, why don't you get over this thing? But his family was a beneficiary. So it is clear that we need to unearth, because all of the people in Britain, of course, did not benefit. But there were people whose wealth was gained from this. And you know, 1834 is not so long ago. It is within living memory. In the United States, it was 1865. In Brazil, it was 1870 something. So what we're saying is there are people who benefited from these systems. And then there will be people who talk about the beneficiaries in Africa who no doubt existed, but not on the scale, nor on the whatever of the generation of wealth. So everybody, I assume, must have read Eric Williams's Capitalism and Slavery, or How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So you see, what these things are not history, they are in the present. And the question is, we can't just wake up in 2021 and say, oh, you know, that was then, but this is now. We actually have to deal with these kinds of things. And I'm glad that people are tracing what is happening and recognizing the connection between A and B and C and D. Glasgow University has gone into a partnership with the University of the West Indies to deal with the fact that it benefited from slavery, and that it's going to have to repair things. Johns Hopkins University, and you know, you name it, all major institutions, churches, banks, hospitals, businesses, all benefited. So why can't we just admit that? No, why not? Because what it will do is that it will bring to the fore an acknowledgement that people have been wronged and that it needs to be sorted out.
Thank you. I think one of the problems is the hiddenness of the history. And you said, I suppose most of you have read Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery.
Yeah.
Most of us haven't, Hilary.
Yes, I know that, but I was being provocative. Can you believe that?
Many people may have done, and how Europe underdeveloped Africa. I remember Yasser Safari being appalled that I'd never read it, so I got it straight away and read it. It is that. So I'm just wondering who'd like to follow up that those points that you're making. Chris Campbell or Professor Satie? Chris Campbell?
Chris, would you like to start?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Hilary.
Hi.
I'd like to refer, and yes, your first question was maybe the impact on the people who came over from the Windrush and how they felt. So I'll refer back to that. I think when referring to them times and talking about timelines, we understand that the country just come out of war where we gave great service, and which was a hidden history of the contributions the old Caribbean West Indies made, and other countries, you know, and through the Commonwealth. So I'm not belittling that, but I'm just talking about how individuals felt coming over. after fighting through the war and actually all of the recruitment from Jamaica, on arrival, to be treated the way they got treated, continually being discriminated against, continually being belittled as a people who came to build up a country. And you referred to the NHS. Yes, the NHS at the same time was being created and staffed by a lot of Commonwealth and other people from around the world too. So, and also a lot of Commonwealth and predominantly Black people built up the estates, what was bombed up, but they could not get none of the houses for 5 years. You know, they had to wait on a waiting list for 5 years, even though these were the people who were building. You know, point being, you talked about Barbados being the educational center and how they plundered Jamaica and took all the wealth out of Jamaica, leaving Jamaican people itself without any form of dowry to pass on to their children, without any sort of legacy of wealth to pass on. And again, to reiterate, the wealth of a people is the people themselves, to take our best people again in the time after the war. And it was a big cohort of the best of our people who came to the Americas and to England, and for the way they got treated. And you know, Yasser's remarks on it, we must remember the knock-on replication of Jamaica itself, and the people how they felt in Jamaica, the ones who got left behind, the ones who you know, so the old feeling, this is what you was discussing, how did the Windrush generation feel? Well, you see, everything has been hidden. The contribution has been hidden. You see, the service has been hidden. We talk of a lot of things, but you see, the information itself is information. When you talk about the deeds, and they take away the information behind the deeds. For example, some wars what got fought where certain regiments, I'd say the Jamaican regiment, were critical in the battles what was fought and won. We know the deeds of the war being won, but we don't know the information, what is strategic in winning that war. So, you know, hidden history is a part of what you're saying. You make good points with racism and class. Look, poor people, the only thing what makes we different from the poor white person in the valleys where I am in Cumbran is the color of my skin, because I get treated different for the color of my skin than they don't suffer, but their hardship and what they go through, I might be going through the same as them because, you know, within that circle. But myself, my hardship is continued and worsened through the color of my skin here and today. I was born in 1963 in Birmingham, so I understand racism and growing up amongst racism. And you see, but we all the time as a people, right, yeah, cannot neglect the fact, and I think Lee's referred to it, and I'll refer to it myself again, is that most of the point is the contribution that we have given through law, through service, through football, sports. It's all been hidden. Somebody says we've been here 2,000 years. Well, maybe we've been here a bit longer than 2,000 years. So the anthropology and all of what they say, it falls on deaf ears. So they would tell you about Cheddar Man, and they would tell you about the first woman, and they would tell you all of these things. And we know about the Twa people of Ireland. So, you know, these are thousands of years, you know, what has been taken and hidden away. I've just got to bless my brother, Abu Bakr. Blessings and love, my brother. Blessings and love, because he was going into it a bit better than me. But, you know, the feeling itself, what you're talking about, the disappointment, you used the word referring to Genic and the knock on, right? Yeah, to the next generation and the effect. It's true, because I feel it myself. My sons feel it, and my daughters feel it, and my grandchildren. How is that possible in this time, in this country? How is it even possible? You make good comments. So who feels it knows it. And I'm going to stop there because this is really what I've got to say.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Abu, I'd like to come to you in a moment. But before that, I'd like to see if Professor Sati, would you like to comment on this discussion?
Yeah, thank you very much, Liz, on 2 points that are quite related. Racism and the interconnection between race and class. I will be thinking at a theoretical level rather than at a practical level, because as an African living on the continent and just traveling once in a while to Europe or America, my encounter with racism is different from those who actually live with it. One example is when I had a short stay in New York for 9 months. Surprisingly, my friends were white people and not black people. And then later on, went down close went to Brooklyn. And I discovered, or so to say, that the black people were a bit hostile to me. And I didn't understand why my own brothers will be hostile to me. And then it was white people that were friendly to me. But later on, I came to understand that the hostility of the blacks to me was that how could they, who have lived, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, they were back there, don't have or didn't have the opportunity that the American gave me to come and do some work in New York. So it was quite amazing that I had to fear black people and be very close and very free with white people. So that's really amazing to me. And so my own encounter with racism is fairly different. But there was an instance where I went to Germany for external examination, and one of the journalists passed a racist comment, and the person said, "Must you bring external examiners from Africa? Aren't there Europeans or Germans?" I think the person just discovered that they goofed, and everybody looked quite, amazed and scandalized by that kind of comment. And it was in a university. So for me, that was racism, but it's nowhere close to those who experience it on a daily basis. Now, so for those who experience it on a daily basis, what is the action point? Because political scientists taught us that power cannot be given to someone. The person has to struggle for it. And I know black people everywhere in the world have been struggling. So will the struggle continue to be on the same pattern of talk, or what is the struggle? What is the pattern of the struggle that will end this discrimination for people who are back there and people who have lived there and people who have contributed enormously to the development of those societies. As a historian, I'm very conversant with those issues, that Europe indeed benefited from African labor. America indeed benefited from African labor. So how do you insert yourselves? How do Africans in those places insert themselves and get the same level of freedom, the same level of recognition, and the same level of treatment? What form of struggle is required for that? It's a question that I don't have the answer. Now, in relation to class and race, these are really, in many cases, intertwined according to the literature and also according to our own experiences as people. There's a very close gap, a close relationship between race and class. For us in history and perhaps sociology and political science, we have this classification of the global north and south. And the global north is basically white, and therefore it belongs to a particular race. And it is presumably and factually loading it down, loading it over those of us in the south. And so we find ourselves continuously engaging with imperialism. And so this imperialism seems to be endless. We have confronted it in various forms, and it continues to manifest in various other forms. So that is the coincidence of race and class. And it can be a very dangerous combination, even in jurisdictions where people, where different people interact, like in Britain, the blacks and the whites, and so on and so forth. So there is a higher level of association of wealth with whiteness, and therefore it increases the tendency for racial discrimination and racial comments and racism. So these are very difficult situations, and I think maybe together as a people, we can begin to think through action points that can help us out of this situation.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I think that's a really interesting summary of your thoughts on this. Thank you so much for being concise there. Thank you. Just before we pass back to you then, Hilary, I'm just going to welcome Apobaga. It's great that you're with us. And I know you missed the beginning bit of Hilary's presentation, but I think you probably got the gist of it. So if you want to contribute, it would be very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Liz. And hello, or good evening, or good afternoon, Hilary. I was here a couple of weeks ago when you did the telephone call. Very interesting. And that's what's brought me back the second time. I found it very inspiring. A lot of the stuff which you said was really important. It was relevant, etc. So, thanks for giving this presentation. I don't know what the presentation was about, like Liz said. I came late, but I just wanted to comment just throw a few things out there, just to basically have my say. I'm a historian, I'm a historian, but I'm a sociologist, psychologist, and anthropologist by training. And I've been engaged in the Black and African history studies for over 40 odd years. My grandmother came over in the 1950s. And she was the one which really told me bedtime stories about Jamaica, about life in Jamaica. She really taught me a lot about colonization, colonialism, etc. And I think that's what made me become a historian. But just a couple of things just to throw out, maybe looking at, race and class. One of the things I want to emphasize as well, what is usually forgotten in British history, is the fact that, because I was even taught this, and this is something which they like to put their head in the sand, and that was the amount of white people which were brought over to the Caribbean to work alongside those people, working in the plantations, especially if you look at the time of Oliver Cromwell, when he had taken over Ireland. A lot of the Irish prisoners of war was sent over to places like Jamaica. And this is why, if you look at the Jamaican language, which is now called the language, we find that there's a lot, it's intrinsically entrenched with the Irish accent. We'll use things like ting and tree. So what I'm saying when we're dealing with language, there's close proximity, a close relationship with other groups of people. But the way that it was stratified in the Caribbean was basically, if you're looking at a class perspective from a historical, using a historical note, one of the things I like to mention when we're looking at the white class, you know, because white people saw themselves in the form of a different distinctive class from dark-skinned people, because Black people who were just working on the plantations or who were domestic servants, as an example, were considered the working class. White poor people were considered people like, you know, white trash. You know, they were known as names as subordinate whites. They weren't really called a working class, indentured laborers, etc. So when we look at the totem pole, the hierarchical structure in Jamaica, or even in the Caribbean islands, at the top you had what was known as the plantocracy, or the planters. Then you had the merchants. These are the people who were buying, selling, import and export. The next group of people were known as the men of profession. So they engaged somewhat with enslaved bodies or souls. And those men of profession, people like maybe your judges, your lawyers, and those type of people. And they were quite privileged, and they were mainly your educated class. And then you had your subordinate whites. Now, your subordinate whites were more of your prisoners of war. So those vagrancy acts which were passed, you know, during the 1500s and 1600s, say, for instance, sent a lot of these poor whites to work over the Caribbean islands, because they couldn't really, because sometimes there was conflicts, you know, on the Atlantic, of trying to get out those resources or supplies of African souls to the Caribbean. So they made up their numbers by using, you know, white subordinates within this country who were known as a criminal class. They were a convict class. And eventually that convict class became like middle managers to an extent. And they were quite brutal, especially when they were taskmasters and all these other type of things. So even though they may have started off as slaves, when they got to like middle management type of thing, they were like a buffer between, you know, the slaves or the coloreds, and obviously those three hierarchical groups, which I talked about, the planters, the merchants, and the men of profession. They were quite brutal, like they had to prove something, especially when it came to torture and punishment and these type of things. So what I wanted to mention about class and race, they are distinctive social divisions, and sometimes they become conflated. And this was very much the case at the turn of the 20th century. And a lot of African Caribbeans or West Indians were coming over, and they were using Marxist theory to try to understand their plight. But Marxism never really looked at enslavement in the Caribbean islands. And, you know, even though the capitalist system was a direct recipient of the resources, raw materials, minerals, and commodities that was coming out of the Caribbean islands, it didn't really mention about the working class, which were the slaves in that part of the world. So these are just some of the things I wanted to bring into the discourse. And the way in which a lot of the people made immense amount of wealth and creating a narrative for us to despise ourselves in order for us to be ignorant of our past. Because like I said a couple of weeks ago, when Dr. Hilary was on, was that my personal experience was quite shocking as a young child. When I was bringing my homework home, you know, about the Tudor and the Stuart periods, I was absolutely shocked that my West Indian parents knew a lot about it. And when I actually asked them about, well, tell me about Jamaican history, you know, they didn't know. They didn't know anything whatsoever. And that was the advantage that I had as an individual. My grandmother, for some reason, because she was older, she wanted to teach me those facts, you know, of the Irish enslaved bodies, which was taking place over there. What was taken on the plantations, they were like concentration camps, the way in which the people were exploited, and the way in which the people were manipulated as well, of believing if they were part of empire or part of the mother country, as an example, they would be given special treatment. You know, and especially if they were like colored people, they really felt that they were going to get special treatment. And this was the experience of Mary Seacole, for instance. She really thought that her white skin or a light skin would give her instant access, you know, because if you read her book about the amazing travels of like Mary Seacole, for instance, in the first page, the first chapter, within the first paragraph, she highlights Creoleness and whiteness, you know, and she's talking about her Scottish blood and it's scorching through her veins, etc. So there was a sense of proudness. And unfortunately, you know, for many West Indians trying to identify with themselves, it was very difficult, but they seemed to embrace, you know, their first names and their second names, which would either which would either Anglo-Saxon or Celtic in origin, and not knowing, you know, their own kind of names. So I know I've thrown a few things out there, but just trying to pick up on a few things. But just to leave you with something, I remember when I was asked to go on Jamaican TV back in 2012, because I was the Olympics and I was also Jamaican independence of 50 years. And I was asked to go on BBC Radio 5 Live. And I was dialoguing or debating with the minister, the Jamaican minister. And one of the things that she was saying, which I found quite shocking, because one of the things that I was posing, that independents haven't really benefited any of the Caribbean islands, because one of the things which the Western powers or the British powers did, they made sure that we inherited their debts, okay, and they took out the wealth, came back in, you know, in order to take away the land, in order to build real estate, you know, hotels and motels and all these other type of things. So we only had political independence. And one of the things that she said on the radio, which was quite shocking for me, for every $1 that is spent within Jamaica, 97 cents, Jamaican cents, is taken out of the country, okay? And it's taken to places like Canada and Germany and Great Britain and the United States of America and to all these other countries. So one of the things is that the exploitation still exists. You know, when slavery was abolished in 1833 as an example, and they then slowly moved this into apprenticeships, you know, where we moved from like physical slavery to wage slavery. And then eventually what took place was that that form of exploitation basically continued, where those groups of people were enriching themselves from our labor, even though the government had compensated them approximately 20 million at the time, which is equivalent to between 15 to 17 billion in today's money. And the thing about it is that not much changes have taken place within Britain. And like Chris was saying about that intergenerational impact which is taking place, you know, that is still ongoing. Like he's talking about himself, his parents, his grandparents, even his children and grandchildren are still feeling the effects of this element of exploitation. So, you know, for us to actually say that we're living in a class dimension as a social division wouldn't be that accurate. We need to look at this specifically as a race issue. You know, even if we are working class, we were discriminated in this country by working class in the 1950s and 60s who were going on strike because of Black workers coming in. You know, we have to recognize that, you know, and then when their jobs, in a sense, was being threatened, they wanted now West Indian Black workers to support them. They were striking for us not to go into work, but then they wanted to use us to bolster their economic stability, you know, with the industrialists or the plant owners in this country. So the thing is, what I'm saying about race and class is there's times in history where, as a group of people, where we're struggling to fight for freedom and see more equality, etc., we do seem to be used at certain times to benefit the dominant class or the dominant culture. And when they get into those positions when we help them, they seem to want to forget us and put us on the side where we're still fighting the same struggles which have been going on for the last 500 years. So sorry for being a bit long-winded. I've thrown a few things out there, but I just wanted to capture some of the stuff I've heard in the last maybe 20 minutes, half an hour of my appearance or attendance to this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I think hopefully this won't be the last time you join us, because we're going to invite you to come and do a presentation at some stage, Apo. I think that would be really, Apobaka, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions there. Now, what I'm going to do now is suggest, Hilary, that we'll let you add anything else you want to, but I very much want to make sure that this session includes our creative artist, Jean Samuel. and the work that he's doing, because one of the things that I know Fred and yourself have always engaged with in your activities has been with creative artists. So I want to be honourable to that today. So Hilary, just over to you then, just for a final little wrap up, and then I think we're going to have to meet you another morning.
Okay, I want to say just a few things.
Thank you.
For me, there have been books which have been very useful in terms of pinpoints at a particular time. Someone talked about the beginning of the 20th century. Claude McKay, who was part of the Harlem Renaissance, wrote a book called Banjo, and it was based in Marseille. And it had Black Africans who, like my grandfather, who was not a Black African, but a Black Jamaican, had fought in the First World War. So it had people from there, it had West Indians, it had all different kinds of people. And there I first learned about the concept of deracination, and which was a very useful. So Claude McKay writing in the 1920s. Louise Bennett's poem Colonization in Reverse, which I guess folks can read, talked about the idea that the people coming from Jamaica were colonizing England in reverse and what they were expecting and so on. So that was written, I think it was in the 1960s. But I want to end on the issue around the creative artists. Well, another issue. The Pan-Africanists were Caribbean and African people who met in the metropole and created a whole set of ideas about how to rebuild and restore the fortunes of African people in different places. So I think the first one was held in Manchester and one was held in London and so on. And so the whole work of those Pan-Africanists, the early Pan-Africanists, was very important. You know, those are some people, I think. But I want to end with Bob Marley. Now, people must be aware that Bob Marley had a white English father and a Black Jamaican mother. And Bob Marley was born in the parish of St. Anne, from which people like Marcus Garvey have come, and Burning Spear and various kinds of people. But Bob Marley's life is a fantastic, this year, just this week, he would have been 76 years old. But Bob Marley's life contained all of the contradictions that we have been talking about. And so the music that Bob Marley and others of his era created is very, very important for us. So whether it is the people, the insurrectionists who are storming the Capitol, who are using Bob Marley's music amazingly, or Tiananmen Square, or whatever the place is, Bob Marley. And what was the source of Bob Marley's music? So he was building on the music that was coming out of different parts of Black America and white America and Africa. But Bob Marley used the Bible as one of his big sources, which of course has sometimes been used against Black people, but he was using it for Black people. He used the speeches of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie. And honestly, I visited Ethiopia two years ago, and there is something about a country which has never been colonized. When you stand in that place, whatever the challenges there are, it is a place which has never been colonized. The Italians tried, but it didn't work. So Bob Marley, I think to use a lovely word, as the apotheosis. I think whereas we can use the concepts drawn from different disciplines, but we also have to look at how individuals unpack and what is the word now? Change the narrative. So Marley, for those of you who are interested, Marley's music, I mean, you know, and as I said, it's not Marley alone, but it is Marley as indicative of the contradictions of race and class, the resistance to the colonial experience, the battle wherever it is fought. So whether it is in Zimbabwe, or it is in Buffalo Soldiers, or it is in whatever. And I do believe that some of the, from what I can see, some of the people who are speaking this morning know of Marley and his music. And of course, Marley's grandchildren are now in the music business, and his children are in the music business. And his wife, Rita, has also been in the music business. Incidentally, Rita Marley, her name is Alpha Rita Marley, was born in Cuba of Jamaican parents and came back to live in Jamaica and has gone to live in Ghana and the United States. So I'm saying that I'm using the Marleys as a metaphor. The last point I want to make about the Marleys, the white Marleys in Jamaica at first rejected Bob Marley. They didn't want to be associated with him. And so he bought a property which came out on what is called Marley Close. So what I'm suggesting to you is,
oops, Hilary, are you there? Oh gosh, we managed to keep this connection so well. We did really well. So Hilary's telling us, suggesting that Bob Marley, and the Marley family are like a metaphor for the things that we're talking through. Hilary, you aren't hearing me, are you? Okay, well, I'm going to thank you very much indeed. Hilary, are you back?
certainly.
Yes,
So and I look forward to hearing.
The Marleys are a metaphor for, you were saying?
The Marleys are a metaphor for this process and this struggle. It is, the contradictions are there. But as I said, 3 to 4 generations of Marleys, maybe more, because as I said, his white family rejected him in Jamaica. Yeah. And some of his black family at first rejected him in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And so some of the things that we have been speaking about are there, but the music and all of the creative work that people like him and Lorna Goodison, etc., have done, and Yassos, etc., are part of how we have to heal the psychological, the economic, and the social kinds of things. Of course, we have to use the media as a way of counteracting the current narrative.
Right. Well, thank you so much. That's been absolutely brilliant, Hilary.
Thank you.
And thank you for everybody who has contributed. And apologies to those of you who would love to have got a word in, but we're running out of time on this section. Now, Jean-Samuel, are you okay just to give us 5 minutes of your time now, or do you want to take a longer slot next week?
Well, it all depends on the people, because I also had a few projections which our friend Simon has. I intended that he would show them. It's just about 3 minutes. Then if he shows them for 3 minutes, I can just talk for 2 minutes. That's okay.
Yes, that would be beautiful.
Because my intention is to just discuss with ourselves what has been happening since the last time I was about.
So. Right, well, let's do it then. Simon's happy for us to carry on for a few minutes. It's great that your work with the foundation. Just introduce it to us again, will you?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello. Just introduce the foundation again, will you, to everybody? All
right. The foundation is called the International Talent Outreach, and that is a talent development initiative which I started in 2000 and in the year 2000 actually. So we've been existing in Cameroon, in South Sudan, and Nigeria, but it's really moving forward in Nigeria more than in the other 2 countries. And December through January this year, a lot of activities happened in Nigeria, which I thought I should share with our group. Like the pictures we now see, these are some of the activities which happened in Nigeria, how the children are so proud to participate, to be part of it. And something which I would like to say is that we are more concerned with the Muslim communities, where we want to see how they can also allow their female children to participate in most of their activities, because our talent initiative is also to bring what we call social inclusion and gender balance. So we are very happy that at that front, a lot of positive strides are being made. And the community is so collaborative with us. As I'm speaking, one of the chiefs of Mina State has donated a lot of land for us to develop it as much as we want, in order to make our dreams come true. And we have been able to rent an office and a hall for the children to feel free within and to consider it their own place, their own place where they can go and exhibit their paintings and do their activities. So basically, everything is moving smoothly, even better than I expected, because of the collaboration of the community in Mina, in Niger State, in Nigeria. And I was hoping to be there last December, as I told you people, but unfortunately, because of travel restrictions, and I was worried that going to Nigeria may mean that I stay there longer than I wanted. And I also heard that the coronavirus, the variant from South Africa was coming to Nigeria, or was already in Nigeria. So I was worried that if I go to Nigeria, it may be difficult for me to come back to the UK. So I've been doing most of the activities online. Every week I have sessions with them, but everything goes on very well. So yeah, that's a little I had to say. Understanding that the time is limited.
Okay, so we'll hear more as the time goes by. So Simon, have you got the short clips?
Yeah.
That's looking good. Right, okay, well, I'm in Australia, but it just looks as if it's upside down to me.
It's upside down. It's side down up, or what?
Yes, it is upside down. Oh dear. Right, okay, try the other one, Simon.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can fix that. Sorry, it's
strange.
They're standing on their heads.
Yeah, well, you know.
Hey, even the other one is the same, but I don't know why.
Yeah. No, well, we'll
yeah, I'm just gonna. I don't think I can. Not sure I can fix that, but give me a second. Let's see what we can do.
If we can't manage, then we'll see this again.
Yeah.
I didn't realise we were upside down in Nigeria, Professor Sati.
Yeah, maybe this is metaphorical.
Especially for me, because I'm in Australia, I know that. Let's give it another go then.
Yeah, I'm just testing offline. Yeah, for some reason it shows, this is very weird, because it shows fine in the preview, and as soon as I launch it,
we're getting...
the other two are just sideways, so I can at least show those.
Yeah. Oh dear. Put your head on one side, folks.
Okay. I happen to be a project supervisor in this international talent outreach.
Okay. How do you feel about what you see so far in talent outreach?
When I came, when I see the children, what they are participating, what they are doing with their hand, in fact, I felt it is marvelous. Because I feel with this, if the children can cooperate, if the parent can motivate them to continue, we will have
Hello.
because with what the children are doing, if they can improve to be doing what they have started doing, they will not be doing with government. They will be self-reliant. So in fact, overwhelmed.
So, what areas do you want to work on so that you improve on the subsequent edition? What do you want to do to improve on the challenges you witnessed in this one?
To encourage the children, I personally have a workshop where I'm training children based on stories. We are sewing ready-made cloth to sell. We are selling ready to wear. So in my own way, personally, right now, I'm on that. I have my shop, I have my apprentices that are training under me. So I wish to even do more than what I'm doing now.
Thank you. Now,
Good. Let's go for the next one.
Right, I think Simon, I think
Yeah.
before you play that one, I think it would be better, and we would do better justice to these clips, John Samuel, if we get them so that we can show them the right way up. And
Yes.
also, I think you're going to need to subtitle them, because I was finding that almost impossible to hear, and yet I know it's really important. So I think that might be something that we can do, and we'll see how we can do that. So thank you very much.
I have to go now. There's a call coming through.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hilary Robertson Hickling. That was excellent. Thank you. A brilliant opportunity for us to discuss some of these challenging issues. And thank you, John Samuel, and thank you everybody else for being here. So we'll finish off the recording now, but we'll stay on to chat later.